Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Octant Community Meeting. Today is April 29th, 2020, and per usual, we have an agenda that we're going to be that we're going to try to follow at least. I'm going to share my screen so you all can see it. There we go. Wayne, you want to start off?
Yeah, sure. So a few things to talk about today. One of them is pretty neat. Brian put up a PR to allow some simple editing. A while back we introduced the Monaco YAML component as a read-only component for the YAML view, and Brian has gone through and done some of the changes necessary to enable editing of resources using that YAML component. It's similar to the first pass that I talked about at the last agenda, where it's a simple, it enables the editor to be edit only, or edit mode, and then there's an update and a cancel button at the bottom that allows you to submit your changes. And yeah, it's I was actually testing it out this morning, and it works pretty well. So that's going to be landing in master very soon. It currently doesn't support custom resources, but that's something we'll be looking into. It also doesn't have any of the smart editing capabilities that we want to have long term, but this is it's a step in the right direction, and it gets us moving towards that goal. So this is a great PR that Brian put up, and yeah, I'm really excited about this feature.
So
you got anything to add, Brian?
yeah, so it does support CRDs. We were drawing the YAML for CRDs separately, but in a change that I put in last week where I consolidated how we draw the tabs, realizing we're only using one YAML thing, so it actually
Nice.
does work.
Oh, excellent.
I didn't realize that until I was talking to Sam yesterday. I'm like, oh, well, hold on.
Yeah, in your original PR, you said it didn't work with CRDs, so I didn't even try it, but that's awesome. Yeah, I'll be sure to give it a run through.
Yeah, please give that a spin.
And then moving on to the terminal streaming update. So this is a change that we're putting there because it overlaps with, well, two things. We get to delete a bunch of code, awful code that I wrote that now we get to delete, which is great. And the other benefit is that when we move Octant to functioning in cluster, the old method for how we were hooking up to terminal exec, or not terminal, the old method of how we were hooking our terminal component up to the Kubernetes API exec call was not going to work in a in-cluster environment. So this change now allows it to function in an in-cluster environment. The terminals themselves operate independently. When you open new browser tabs, there's no more muxing of the session. And we also changed how we actually stream the content and connect and disconnect from the terminal sessions. So it now follows a similar pattern that we were using with the new logging implementation. So this is a great change that we wanted, but we also need for in-cluster work. So will be landing soon. Sam and I were pairing on this earlier this week, and Sam wrapped up the work yesterday, and so we will be landing this. This will be part of, I imagine both of these things will end up being part of the nightly build, as well as the next one I'm about to talk about. And then the next one is work that Milan has done. This is all around the logging improvements. So we released the new logging UI. Folks gave us a bunch of great feedback, and Milan jumped on all of that and implemented, I think, pretty much all of the requests. And so now it's pretty great. The regex expressions, they support the filtering. The search itself is now by default case insensitive. Timestamps have been turned off by default since most things in most things that are logging are also injecting their own timestamps. So you're still seeing those timestamps, but we've turned off the timestamps that are part of the Kubernetes API log entry for that pod. So they're still available but render's now off by default. And then we also added the ability to, well, he also added the ability for searching and filtering on the container names. So we recently added a feature where you could now see all of the containers logs combined in the viewer. And now you can search and filter on that when you're looking at the all view. There's still a drop down to let you select individual containers. So this is more applied to when you're looking at that collection of all of the container logs. And I don't know if Milan has anything to add to that.
Right.
And so then moving on, so these three things are being reviewed right now. They're all looking good, and will probably be part of the nightly that gets produced tonight. So if you're interested in checking those out early, they'll be there. Any questions, comments about any of those items before I move on? All right. So moving on to the next topic, which is I call it the duality of Octant. So Octant has a desire to be a desktop application. It also has a desire to run in cluster, apparently. I'll a typo there. It has a desire to run in cluster. Certain aspects of these things are in direct competition with one another. They don't agree on certain things when you do them. So we are planning and focusing on the items that overlap both of these areas that allow us to enable getting both of these features completed in a way that continues to progress. So we're working on these issues in a way that will continue to progress each one forward. And most of that is just around things like allowing Octant to start without a kubeconfig present, right? That is useful for the application, and that is useful for in cluster. Allowing folks to then provide, so that's the startup part of it, and then allowing folks to then provide some type of method for authenticating a user so that it can access a cluster, right? That's a piece that will, on the application side, we've already solved, right? Because you just provide us a kubeconfig. But on the server side, we'll solve it some other way, but we can create an interface that they share where it looks the same, right? One is accepting a kubeconfig and then producing this interface that pushes the authentication throughout all of the application. And the other will be consuming some other model of permissions and then using that same interface to push it through Octant. So we're starting to think about these problems and create some issues and some epics around progressing towards both of these paths, but in a way that we're addressing all of the overlapping work that is there for us kind of first. And so I just wanted to call that out, that you'll start to see both of these issues kind of being progressed with a focus on issues that overlap both areas. Things that are still, that I mentioned last time, that are still uncertain and that we won't be addressing anytime soon are plugins in cluster. It's a later date, undetermined, TBD. And also generally like what the recommendations are going to be for like in cluster deployment and what that YAML and images are going to look like, things like that. That's also TBD. This is more about the architectural and engineering work that needs to be done to even support those ideas at a later date.
So see, you have a new branch here, the Electron Builder branch.
Yeah, there's a work in progress branch that is, I think I pushed it up to the main repo. It might just be on my personal one, but I intended to push it up to the main repo. And yeah, it's using Electron Builder to build Octant as a standalone binary using the 0.12.1 release, which has all of the new navigation and the new breadcrumbs and all of the features that are necessary to allow Octant to run an Electron container without needing back buttons and any of the traditional like browser Chrome that you would use to move around. It is very much a work in progress, Branch. There's a lot of learning that needs to be done on my end about creating Electron applications in the correct, efficient manner. Just because we got Electron Builder working and spitting on EXE does not mean it's actually ready to hand off to people to release. So we're in constant experimentation with that and progressing towards something that looks like we want. And same with in-cluster work. Anytime we find an area that needs addressing, we address it with respect to supporting, session-based work and removing global context and things like that. So
Cool. I think we talked about this last week as well, but it's a common question. Do you have any timeline for when we can see an example Electron app that people can try out in a nightly build or something like that?
Yeah, I think we'll probably have an Electron experimental build going within the next, I would say, 2 to 3 weeks. And then the in-cluster work that we're playing around with now, I think that we will, I would put that somewhere in July-ish, where we would have something that people could really there'll be pieces that people can use before then, but really being able to say yeah, we support this. Maybe it's still alpha, but we support it. That's kind of like my loose timeline on that stuff.
Cool. Awesome. Does anyone have any questions or comments here? Ryan?
Yeah, the Electron app is mostly me being selfish. I want it so if it runs in Electron, then that means I can put it in my status bar on my Mac, which means that I can have it running and I can use it to change namespaces, and I can put other interesting things like summary information, which we're keeping, put it right up there because right now I have it on my left screen, taking up half of it, and sometimes I don't want to see that, but I still want everything that Octant provides.
Yeah, it's going to be super interesting to see what you all come up with here.
Yeah, and something one of the things is that I find useful about it is to kind of go along with what Brian's saying. A friend of mine is using Octant. They work at Red Hat, and they use Octant to look at kind of their OpenShift stuff. And the thing they said was when they first started using Octant, they really wanted it to just be in cluster. But now that they've been using it as a desktop application, they definitely don't want it in cluster. They're so happy that it's a desktop application. And I think that's kind of I think most people just want something that's a web app because it's easy and it's in their brain that it should just be in cluster. But then when you start to use it as a desktop application, you realize just the advantage of using informers and how fast it is, and eventually moving towards native integrations with status bars and pop-ups and tools and things like that. So that's why we're still doing both, is because there's a whole class of people that want it to be a desktop application and find it very useful in that way. And then there's another class of people who work in super large enterprises that don't want to distribute a binary to all their employee laptops, but want everyone to use Octant, right? Who just want it to be running as a web service somewhere. So there's the need for both. And we're going to address both of them. So that's why we're putting in the effort and the work to maintain both of these kind of paths of Octant, is because there's enough audience for both.
And there's a very idiomatic use case that makes sense with browsers where you want 2 different views open at the same time. And you may have to re-implement that in native, but just have 2 tabs or 2 windows open or whatever in the browser.
So yeah, Tim, I find that interesting. People say that. I'm actually looking for those use cases because if that's a use case where someone wants multiple things open at once, maybe we should tackle those things rather than saying go between two web pages. Because if you think about so AWS, people don't generally use two web pages, or Google Cloud Console, people are not using two web pages there. So maybe that's a UX thing that we should tackle and try to approach it that way.
That's fair. Maybe I'm creating, maybe I have a pet namespace over here that got built a long time ago. That's got a lot of custom stuff, and I'm trying to bring it up to snuff with a more standard. So I want two different namespaces in two different windows or two different tabs, and I really just want to visually compare them. That's a use case I just came up with just now. I'm not saying I have that use case right now, but that's an idea that I don't think we could shove that into Octant with any UX improvement without like breaking the metaphor that exists right now.
But you can still use the browser, right? That's still going to be available.
Yeah,
So
I'm just confirming that I know that I'm the kind of person that's likely to sometimes really get value out of the browser.
right. I kind of see this as a similar to Slack, for example. Slack has app that's Electron based and has a web page, and some people use one, some people use others. So there's a value in each case, and I think if we support both, we can cover both camps.
Yep.
All right, we got one question here in the open Q&A. Someone, I don't know who.
I put that in. Sorry, I tried to ask it earlier, but my microphone failed me. So what's the plan for the validation? That's going to be a little tricky, I think, for the editing, because we need to do round trip, and right.
He's got.
So this is the trick. And there's a reason why I pushed for Monaco, not because it was a good editor, because I knew what Monaco could do. One of the things that makes VS Code so powerful is its ability to be an editor for anything. And the basis for that is actually Monaco. And so what we can do is we can actually generate so if we know what an object is, I can actually, if I know what an object is, I know what the properties using OpenAPI v2 of what the object is. I can actually build a tool or I can build something that says, hey, this is I can say these are the valid values, and I can actually show that it's invalid right in line. And so that's the goal. I haven't done any of that work yet, but I've done it all separately in other projects, so I know that it should work. And just to let y'all know, if we get this done, oh my God, this is one of those killer features. No one is doing that.
Absolutely.
The holy grail.
So, but it's a good question, because it's like, and that's something that I was talking with Wayne about earlier this week, where I said the reason I put that editor in preview is because just creating and editing objects is a thing. But when we get in, and there's a reason why I created the editor before I created the create, because there's more work that needs to be done for the create. We should not just say, oh, here's an empty editor, here, go type your YAML in. That won't be great. So we need to approach that with being able to upload a piece of YAML from your local computer, or if we know that you're creating a deployment, Cube Control has templates in there that gives you the basics for creating a deployment, and 13 other items. I think I counted, it's like 13 other items. So we can get those for free. And the ones that we don't have, like for stateful set, replica set, all the other workloads that we support, and everything else that's on the sidebar, well, we'll just create defaults and we'll do it the same way. So for every single thing that we can, besides CRDs, we could just say, hey, I want to create this. We fill in most of it for you, And if it's something that has a workload in it, then you just fill in the, maybe the most you have to change is a container image. And that's where I would like people to be. And then you can upload the rest. So that gets you most of the way there. And then we can see how people are using it and how we're using it and see if that actually satisfies. So that's a theory there. And then there was something else I wanted to bring up. So I was talking to Sam yesterday, and he brought up that the team is thinking about the resource viewer. And this is another piece where we'll have to tread lightly, because one of the most interesting parts of Octant to me, and I actually gave Sam a demo of this yesterday about how I use resource viewer and why all the things are in there, because it's hard to understand if a user wants to see everything or they want to see like a trimmed down view. We really can't make it so. It's easier to show everything and then be able to pare that back than to start with nothing and then scale it forward, because what are you scaling it to? So this will be an interesting, I think one of the biggest pieces for Octant going forward will be more about user experience and actually figuring out how do we engineer a better experience on Kubernetes, not just like features and whatnot, just like, but I'm sitting down and I'm using this thing, and how does it make me better at whatever else I happen to be doing? So that's something we need to think about. And it's funny, I'm wearing my Octant shirt today. I didn't even plan on being on this call, but I'm here and I'm wearing an Octant shirt. So serendipitous or coincidence, I don't know.
All right, so I think we got those questions answered. Is there any? Are there any other questions from anyone on the call today? You want to bring up?
So I have a question. There was a Slack thread about some large cluster perf work. Did anybody get a chance to investigate that?
Yes, it has been investigated. It has not been solved yet, but we know what the issue is. And just for people on this call, I'll explain to you a little bit about how Octant does what it does. So when we first started Octant over almost 2 years ago, had this idea of using informers so we could cache this information on your local machine, and we could have this data available to you almost instantly because it's in memory. Then we move forward, and on a development cluster, this is perfect. But then you move into people who, when you start using this on production clusters, and you can't actually say what the state of permissions are going to be. So we can't assume that you have permissions to see things in the cluster. So we have to do auth checks. And what happened is the amount of auth checks that we were doing is actually I guess on a larger cluster or on a cluster with a lot of objects, that it can actually strain that controller, and that's what happened. Now the fix for it is no fix right now, but need a reason about why that's happening, and then can we do it less? One thing that Kubernetes does not provide us is a way to tell us when auth changes. So we don't know. You have to pretty much check all the time. Every time you view an object, you have to check. You can't just say, even if I wish I could even say, hey, for the next 5 minutes, give me this token and I will use this token, and it will expire and I'll reset it. So you can't do that. But I think that as part of our solution, that actually we might have to invent that ourselves, where we just go and we register short-lived tokens per client. So we can say that a client will live for a minute, and during that minute we won't do any auth. And when that token expires, we'll get a new client and we'll do auth again. So we will spread out the amount of auth calls over time rather than doing them every time. So for example, if you look at the homepage for like Octant, and you have, like, I'm just looking at one right now, I have 2 deployments. There's 7 pods, 2 replica sets, and a job. We do a lot of auth calls, so for every single item on there, we're going to do at least 1 auth call, and I think we can do better than that.
Sounds good. So, I mean, one of our big goals is to kind of start running in cluster, right? So I'm assuming that a big part of that potentially organization, some of the informer work and some of that work is also potentially solving this problem as well.
No, actually, and when we run in cluster, we won't have this problem at all because we'll be using individual client, and whenever the client gives you a not found, it's easier for us since we're going directly to the client, not using the informer. We won't actually have this issue. This is only because of the informers.
Got it. Yeah.
Mhm.
So you know the way I view it is, and obviously we'll work with Stephanie and Wayne moving forward is. I want us to start thinking about some of the big bets that we want to make moving forward. Like, for example, we'll finalize some of the work around the Electron App, but then after that, we need to basically put a significant amount of resources on the in-cluster work. And then in addition to that, we can start adding some of the small, high-impact either bug fixes or features that people have asked for, like some of the things that, Brian, you have mentioned in the past as well, that are like that small fixes or small work significantly improves experience or moves the needle. But at the same time, move the ball forward on some of our big bets, the things that are going to make significant impact to users, right?
Yeah, and actually, so that's something I work on. Wayne will attest to this. I browbeat him on Monday about this, and we have to what I'm going to put out there about the in cluster work. We're going to shed. It's not going to be 100% the same. I think that most of the things you can see on the front end will still be there, but things that are hard, like plugins, we're going to have to reinvestigate, and we will slide on those for the initial version. And I actually don't think that's a problem. And then we can actually rethink how we're doing plugins and in a way that can work in and out of cluster, because plugins, we weren't thinking of in cluster at all when plugins came around. So they make a certain set of assumptions. So I think we can actually move faster in certain directions. What Wayne and I are working on right now is actually, first of all, we figured out which way we wanted to point. Now we need to figure out how we're going to break that work up. And it's not, and actually this is not this is like a mythical man month problem. Throwing more, people on it doesn't make it go faster, because really what we're trying to do is we got to figure out what those pieces are and split them up. And so that's happening when we started talking about it. So it's going to be happening soon about how do we split this up and split this functionality up and then give it the right set of interfaces so we can still make sure that it works in its current way, but also can work in another way as well. This is the fun part about software, and you write it to one specification and one thought, but moving it midstream is pretty difficult in some cases, but it's not possible. Definitely can do it.
Yeah, sounds good.
Right.
Did we, Tim, I don't know, I missed the previous meeting. Has anybody talked about the Octathon or the Octant Hackathon and some of the tentative dates that you had on that?
Not yet, no.
Okay, so we have some tentative dates we have on that. Maybe if any of you want to start, maybe put some blocks on your calendar, is June. And again, this is tentative, it's not fully committed, but it's June 17 to end of day June 23rd. And we can go a day plus or a day minus. So we can go 18th to 24th, for example. That's an option as well. It will be after radio for those of you that are interested in participating or viewing a lot of the radio discussions. So it may be a couple of weeks of reduced throughput. The ask for the Octant team is basically that we are available by Zoom or a Slack channel that folks can come in and ask questions as they're navigating, creating plugins, or asking questions or anything in general, troubleshooting. So we're basically going to become good stewards of the community and help them get ramped up and running and quickly contributing to create a plugin. The reason why we're having it span a week is to give folks a couple of business days and a couple of weekend days. For the folks that can take time off work to contribute, then they can do that. And the folks that really can't do that during work day, they can find a weekend to basically play around a little bit with it. So,
all right. Well, I'll just let y'all know. Work doesn't stop. I actually have to run. But I'll see y'all. Hopefully, it won't be 2 weeks again. Maybe it will be, but I will try to come back.
Thanks, Brian.
Bye.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Yeah, I think that concludes the meeting today as well. Thank you all for joining, and yeah, have a fantastic rest of the week. Talk to you all next week. Bye, everyone.
bye, everybody.